Greetings, everyone. I am Latricia Scriven, and I get to serve as the senior pastor of St. Paul's United Methodist Church here in Tallahassee. On behalf of WFSU Media and the Village Square, we are delighted that you are here joining us today, God Squad Church versus State. This program is part of God Squad series that is offered by Village Square for the last 15 years in partnership with faith leaders from all over our community. Tonight's program is being streamed live on Facebook via FSU, WFSU Public Media, and the Village Square's Facebook pages. But if in case you miss it, this 1 hour long God Squad conversation is also scheduled to air on WFSU FM 88.9 Friday, September 20th at 7 p.m. Eastern. Let someone know, invite them all. So let's get started by having each of our today's God Squad members introduce themselves.
I'm Josh Hall with First Baptist Church of Tallahassee, Florida.
I'm Betsy Willett-Zierden, retired United Methodist clergy.
I'm Paul Sidlowski, Rabbi of Temple Israel here in Tallahassee.
Father Tim Holida, the Co-Cathedral of St. Thomas More.
I'm Stephanie Posner at Temple Israel of Tallahassee.
Thank you all. So let's just jump right in. I was reading an article by David Calloway on the separation of church and state. And one of the things, as you can imagine, that was lifted was that anytime the role of religion in politics comes up today, we can almost count on the fact that someone is going to bring up, quote, there is a separation between church and state. So proponents will say that this separation is law and it must be maintained. And perhaps opponents might say that this phrase never appears in the Constitution and goes too far when taking religion out of public life and discourse. So my question is this: in or out? Should religion be in our public and political discourse or out? And how far is too far? Anyone can start.
Well, I mean, the way you phrase the question, should it be in or out of our political discourse? Mm-hmm. Well, it is a part of our political discourse. Mm-hmm. And I'm not sure that there's anything wrong with bringing your faith into the public square in ways that are healthy and an American, if you will. Mm-hmm. I'm not sure that that's the danger.
Okay.
So,
thank you.
I would say it's fine to have religion enter the dialogue. The problem is when it's a religion or a government trying to put their views on everybody, as was done in countries prior to the United States forming and still is done in some places in the world today. I think it's important to have values in our country. Some of them come from religion, some of them may not come from religion, and people who are not following religion to find their values should be able to express their values as well. But I think it's important that there be openness and not any dogmatic idea of how religion should be practiced. But the fact that it is a part of the makeup of our country is very important.
Yeah, I think I would say that I think it's important to kind of note like the historical underpinnings of this idea of separation of church and state. It began with really a fear that the federal government would establish a particular faith for everybody in all the colonies. The colonies each had rules that did not reflect like what we have in our Bill of Rights. Some of them had, some are very anti-Catholic. Wouldn't allow Catholics to serve in office, vote, things like that. And so the fear was that by uniting and creating this federal government, that they would somehow, enforce a specific view or a specific religion. So it left the question open to the individual colonies. It was mainly restricting the federal government. What it's evolved to now, the Supreme Court has taken and expanded that so that everyone basically in the United States has to kind of, the First Amendment, everybody falls underneath that. I'm not saying that's a bad thing. I'm just saying I think it's an important context to kind of understand what that means. I think when people take it too far, this idea or concept of separation of church and state means that we have to remove religion or any semblance of it, or any expression of it completely and totally from the world or from society. And I think that goes a little too far. I don't think that's what anybody intended, and I don't think that's what most people would like to see.
All right, so thank you for bringing that up. When we talk about the historical underpinnings, what is the case is that people have been arguing over where these boundaries are for a very long time. And we might say currently, we don't particularly know where the boundary might be drawn or have some agreements and disagreements about that, which leads me to a thought around moral authority versus legal authority. So my question is, in what ways can religious institutions influence public policy without overstepping the boundaries of church and state? Boundaries, of course, that we may not have agreed on, but how can we influence without overstepping those boundaries?
I think from the time we are teaching our children to the time people are in the congregation listening to clergy speak on whatever they're speaking on the weekly portion, what have you, we are educating our community on our tradition's belief system, which in turn, we hope they'll go out and be good citizens and follow the moral opinions of our community. And I know each one of us, whatever our faith background is, we each have them, and that is how we can be effective in getting people to use good moral compasses.
Mm-hmm.
Just sometimes with this conversation, it almost, those who have religious convictions, the assumption is, well, their morals are in a different category because of the basis. But everyone who advocates a particular ethic, particular politics, has a basis for that, even if it's not religious. And so to put religious convictions in a particular category and go, well, we have to put extra guardrails around that, we should be evaluating the content of the law, not necessarily discrediting it because of where it comes from or the source.
Mm-hmm. So it's interesting. I like to tell people sometimes I'm a Louisiana girl living in a Florida world. And I know that there have been conversations around the 10 Commandments in Louisiana, say being posted in public places, and in Florida, states all over. These concerns are coming up more and more because as we think of our own religious convictions, sometimes there is a tendency, right, to want to influence everyone else to think how we think. What would you say about that? Even something as simple as, or not simple, as the 10 Commandments being posted. What might we say?
Well, I was just going to say, and I know she's got it on her phone, but I mean, the point of the First Amendment was to prevent government from establishing a specific religion. And as far as Louisiana goes, you may know that they have not been posted yet. That's
right.
Stalled until November 15th. I think there's been some pushback. But and now I'm glad I have Rabbi and Stephanie here, but the first commandment of the 10 Commandments is clearly religious, right? What does it say, Rabbi, the very first one?
I am the Lord your God.
I am the Lord your God. You'll have no other gods before me. So while I have a copy of the 10 Commandments beautifully framed, like gorgeously framed in calligraphy in a red frame hanging in my home. Actually, it's in my new house in Apalachicola in the closet because I haven't hung all my new pictures yet. And I value the 10 Commandments. The pushback is because now you are now establishing a specific religion, maybe Judeo-Christian religion, if you will. And that is the problem.
So one of the conversations that's been had around that has said, it's not religious at all. This represents some of our historical values, the historical values upon which the United States rests, that people, have believed over time, even if it has shifted. So it's less about religion and more about remembering history. How might that idea come into the conversation? Maybe not even simply with the Ten Commandments, but in other spaces where we say we're simply honoring history here?
Well, I think if we were a country that was devoid of values at all or history, then it would be a pretty empty place as far as the substance of it. So when you say it's part of history, I think the first question would be whose history? Because as we become more and more diverse as a country, yes, we are, a Judeo-Christian country we claim to be and so on, but it's not. I mean, it's a country that's much more diverse than that. People come from all different places in the world, all different religions, all different belief systems, or no religion at all. And so I think we need to make the discussion more about values, has been said by several people already, and less about dogma or doctrine. If we talk about having values, some of which are expressed in the Ten Commandments, but don't have to be expressed by the Ten Commandments specifically in order to have everyone follow a specific way of saying it. So I think the values more than the dogma is what we should be focusing on. The problem is when we have this discussion, as usually happens, we tend to get polarized and get either all in or not at all. It doesn't have to be. It can be somewhere in the middle. So we don't have to have it be the Ten Commandments up in every classroom, but we should have values in every classroom. And what those are should be discussed among all the people and determined.
But just for the sake of argument, I mean, when you say, if you look at the First Amendment and it says no establishment of religion and no prohibiting the free exercise thereof, okay, so the federal government, and now, as Tim's pointed out, it's been, Supreme Court has expanded that to states, cannot establish an official national religion or an official state religion. Well, if the Ten Commandments are held by the Jewish faith and the Christian faith, and those two faiths, we would say there are fundamental differences between the two, how can displaying that establish both conflicting faiths simultaneously? Do you get what I'm saying? So it's like, so I mean, I get the concern, but at the same time, it clearly doesn't pass, the objection to me doesn't pass the establishment criteria. Now, we can say for other reasons that we might have concerns or whatever, but when sometimes it devolves to, well, now you're establishing a religion. When we're talking about the Ten Commandments, that's where I'm like, well, which one? Because we've got both verses, and I do think there's merit. We can say it in a boogeyman kind of way, but I do think there's merit in acknowledging when our founders were first composing the Declaration of Independence, the Constitution, they were drawing from this tradition and acknowledging the role that played in shaping our country's founding. Like, why do we have to, like, to me, that's not the equivalent to setting in perpetuity values and, making law as opposed to acknowledging. I mean, look at the building of the Supreme Court building. Just look at the architecture. Nobody has gone and sandblasted away some of the images we see inside the courtroom.
So I just, for the sake of the audience, perhaps, and me, because I don't read the laws of Louisiana because I live in Florida, what exactly is this law that you're talking about?
Well, so one of the things says Louisiana passed a law, even though, yes, some things are on hold, allowing the display of the Ten Commandments in public school classrooms, which sparked legal and constitutional debates. Critics argue that such measures violate the Establishment Clause of the First Amendment that was just being talked about, while others have said that it is simply a reflection of historical values, even like printing "In God We Trust" on money.
So I think there's a big difference there between allowing and mandating.
And you misspoke, I think, because I think it's required.
Well, this came from one of the articles that we all were, yeah.
So I think allowing is different, agreed. But from what I read is they are requiring it to be posted in every single classroom, every elementary school classroom, every college classroom.
So
if it goes that far.
Right.
If that's the case, I mean, just a question I would be interested in is, I would just be interested in what the intentions are of this law, like what's behind it. I'd just be kind of curious about that. Because I doubt it's like, we just need to learn some history. Because I have a suspicion that that's not the real motive. Yeah. I'd be curious what it is. But I think if we start mandating that certain things like that be published that are clearly explicitly religious, I think we are starting to flirt with that line that we were trying to avoid, I think, as our country's tried to avoid all these years.
And we have different interpretations even of the Ten Commandments. We had this discussion last time. Is this an absolute moral law or not? And shouldn't we, as religious leaders, think the Ten Commandments of all things are absolute? And while yes, I would absolutely argue that the Ten Commandments are very important, I would say there's not an absolute about them because they're open to interpretation. So when you talk about the fourth commandment, about the Sabbath. And keeping it holy. So when is the Sabbath? Well, for me, it's not the same.
So let me jump in and ask this, because we can, go down lots of holes around interpretation, and we do as faith leaders, even sometimes when we think we believe the same things. Right. Should religious education have a place in public schools?
I'll start if I can, as an educator.
Okay.
No. For several different reasons, sort of tying into putting the Ten Commandments in the classroom. Currently, you have children in every public classroom that are not all Christian or Jewish. Some are Muslim, some are Hindi, some are Sikh. They don't necessarily understand what the Ten Commandments are because it's not part of their religious tradition. And also, I know I can speak for myself as a Jewish person, and I'm sure you all might feel this way, but I don't know if I'm comfortable with someone who is not of my faith teaching my traditions and my faith's morals to other people without necessarily knowing them. I had an experience with my own child where she came home from school and said, "Boy, that was an interesting conversation we had about Hanukkah," because they weren't familiar with the holiday. It doesn't necessarily have a place there. If you want to teach your child your religious traditions, then there are schools that are religious day schools or homeschooling or part-time religious education. Those are the places for you to have your children learn that information about your religion, not in a public space where it could be taught incorrectly and with bias.
Can I go back to something Tim said, like what is Louisiana's motivation? And just touch on the decision by the Supreme Court, Kennedy versus Bremerman, that was shifted 50 years of precedent, and is allowing some of these pressures. So what I think is happening is that there's a movement at the state level to test the Supreme Court's ruling and to see how far folks can go in putting religion in schools or changing some of the things that are being changed, or some of the challenges that we're facing right now. And I just want to say it's important to be aware of what's happening at the state level, not just focused on what happens in Washington, D.C., but the things that are changing, they're being tested here at the state level. I mean, recently putting chaplains in Florida schools, volunteer chaplains. Wow. There are some chaplains that I would not want coming into my hospital room when I'm sick. And I know them well. So would I want them in the school? Probably not. Anyway, I just wanted to get back to that.
I'd just say we talk about religious education in public school. So I think, I agree with Stephanie. I would be Catholic schools, our system in the United States arose from a hostile environment towards Catholics, right? To protect our faith and to protect Catholic immigrants and so on who would come here and who were getting taught different things in their schools and so on. So I would not feel comfortable with just some person in a public school teaching the Catholic faith. That's why we have churches. That's why we have religious education and so on. However, I have a memory when I was in fifth grade. I think I was in fifth grade, and we had a Jewish teacher, my homeroom teacher, and I still remember her. We did Hanukkah candles. She brought in challah. Is that right? Is that how I say it? The bread?
Yeah.
Okay, I want to make sure. Challah, yeah. And I don't know. I just remember at some point we did it. It might not have been during Hanukkah. We had, and it wasn't taught in a way that was proselytizing or anything.
Right, it was sharing.
It was just sharing some of her traditions and things, and what the background of it was. I just don't, I think in some ways we need to relax.
Yeah.
People need to relax, and I think if someone teaches something like that and it's something of value, there's a big difference between proselytizing and just sharing something about your culture or your background. To me, it would make no difference if somebody from another nation was teaching their culture and background, had, you know, maybe a distant relationship to religion or not. I mean, we're not going to be a more open society if we constantly are suspicious of any kind of mention of religion or culture or background or anything like that. But I think we have to draw a line, and we have to be careful. And I think so. Religious ed, what does that mean? Are we studying religion as religion? You know, I would be kind of uncomfortable with that personally anyway. But I just think we need to kind of lighten up a little bit.
So it's interesting because, you know, one thing is, are we studying religion, right? But there are ways that our religion influences public schools without just studying religion, because they're a part of who we are, which is why we have such major book banning here in Florida and all over everywhere else. Often that's because of certain values that individuals hold from a religious perspective, and we find ways to influence or to bring that into a public school even. But we might say, I'm not teaching religion. This is about values. This is about what should be the case based on what I or we believe.
For your child. I mean, to ban a book that you take issue with because of your personal religious beliefs, to ban it for everyone, I don't think that's appropriate. I think it's okay for you to say, this book is not appropriate for my family. We will not allow our children to read it. I would not argue with that. Go right ahead. But I might want my child to read it because it is a lesson opportunity for me.
But I do think you have to remember, though, like, because book ban has such a pejorative connotation, like, if it's still on Amazon and it's still published in the US, like, make sure that that's not what we have in our head versus what can that elementary school library carry. And this is also where that principle of subsidiarity, that it's that idea of, okay, maybe the federal government doesn't need to be deciding that, but that local school board that is elected by the people, if they push too far or not far enough, then the people have recourse to say, no, we don't like that you banned that book, or you should have banned this other book. So they're not left voiceless. Now, yeah, on an individual level, you might disagree with where that came out, but that's part of that pluralism in this, you know, democratic experiment we're living in. Is it's like, yeah, I might not win every vote, but that's okay. I can try to persuade in the marketplace of ideas. You win some, you lose some.
So in this democratic society that is very, very diverse, and we know that we bring all of ourselves with us to the table, should personal religious beliefs of public officials play a role in their decision-making process?
Again, I'll go back to values. And I think, you know, the politicians are human beings. We still cling to that idea.
Allegedly.
And we should recognize that they do come with their own set of values.
Absolutely.
However, and this is not a political statement, but I will use it as an example. Think of our current president, President Biden, who was asked a number of years ago about his views as a practicing devout Catholic about abortion. And how can he be pro-choice when he's a Catholic? And I thought his answer was excellent. He said, my personal belief is this, and it's what as a Catholic I believe, but as President of the United States, I cannot impose that on everybody. And so I believe in allowing people to choose. Now, whatever part of this side you're on or somewhere along the spectrum, I respect that answer because it to me speaks to this topic. Your personal beliefs, the bottom line is no. It shouldn't, but the fact that their values are going to enter into it, we have to recognize that and allow that to be. What we have to allow for is more communication and more discussion rather than knee-jerk reaction and hating the other person or dismissing the other person because they have a different view. Let's hear other values, other faith views or lack of faith views, and bring them into discussion and come to a conclusion for the country based on what seems to work. But it's a compromise. It's not going to be exactly
think
what
Tim
one
is
person
trying
wants.
to get in. Thank
Yeah,
you for
go
that.
ahead.
Well, as a Catholic, I'd like to comment on that. I did not like his answer, and the reason I didn't like his answers is I think it's ridiculous, and I'll tell you why. Every law is a judgment or a decision on what is good and what is bad, or what is right and what is wrong. Now, where do our laws or our government derive this judgment on what is good and what is helpful and so on for society? They derive them from somewhere. So for a politician to ever say, I don't want to impose my beliefs on others is foolish, because that's what they do. All of them do it. Now, if he's meaning that as a Catholic, he holds this belief, but he doesn't feel like he's entitled to, that shouldn't enter into his value system, I just think that's strange, because then later on in that same, and I remember that particular debate where he said that, he later went on to talk about how it was important for him to take care of the poor and to take care of people who didn't have health insurance and things like that. Those are also very Catholic things. So where do we draw the line then? Where all of a sudden, where are these values that exist that everybody agrees with, and that we just hold self-evident? Or what are these values? And why is it if it comes from my faith, which is a belief system, why is that all of a sudden not acceptable to put into law, or allow that to influence my values or my policy?
Well, I'll respond to that. I will say, where does it come into law? Well, or doesn't it? Because a huge part of the country does not accept that view. And to have it opposed because it is the view of a particular religion, have it imposed on the entire country is not right. And I think that's the essence of what he was talking about. It's clear that people who call themselves pro-life will take one side of a perspective on Biden's statement, and people who are pro-choice will see it from another way. But trying to be as objective as possible, it is not right, in my mind, to impose that particular religious view, because I know a lot of people who would consider themselves religious who do not support the argument of purely pro-life.
Okay,
They
So
might
then
be
but the question really comes back to what I said, right? What is the source then? Where does the government derive its judgment on what's right and wrong? If it's the majority, that's a very dangerous place to put ourselves in, because we've seen majorities, especially in the 20th century, do away with all sorts of freedoms and impose all sorts of things on minorities. So I think we have to be, this is a very, and I don't have an answer for it necessarily. I'm just throwing that question out there.
I think we're getting to the crux of the situation here. I mean, what is right or wrong is not agreed upon across the board. And however, there are religious people that will say, part of my conviction is that this needs to be a Christian country based on my way of interpreting scriptures and Christianity. And they feel deeply, and I mean, I know them, probably was in this camp at one time in my life, that it is my role as a Christian. In the past, I believed this. Make sure that gets on the tape. In the past, I believe that it is my role and my calling to convert you to not only Christianity, but to my way of thinking and my way of understanding what it means to be a Christian. And that's what's creeping in some of these test cases in some of these states, is that worldview. And that's frightening to me, because basically, what would you call that, Josh, when people come across that way?
I don't know.
You don't know?
Yeah. Well, but to your question though, I mean, my answer, I'd say, should a person's religious values, if they hold a public office, influence it? 100%.
How can they not?
They will.
And again, back to the point that I was making earlier, we have this this myth that secular equals neutral. That well, if they have secular beliefs, then that's neutral and everyone would agree on it. And it's every candidate, the two candidates, each will try to impose what they believe on the country, regardless of whether it's from a religious source or not. And so I would much rather see someone who happens to be of faith and elected living out those convictions and those values. And guess what? If we, the people, disagree, you shouldn't have voted him in, or you can vote him out. But we get the government that the majority of voters deserve. And so I think they should completely live that out. And that's what creates that, disconnect for us, is when someone says, these are my convictions, but I don't want to live those out. But it's a particular conviction that they don't want to push on, because when it's other things that come from a religious source that's more acceptable, then it's okay for everybody to nod and go, well, good for you for, living by conviction. And so I just think, again, there's no one else that we say, well, you shouldn't live out your atheism if you're elected as an atheist, that you shouldn't be able to live out your beliefs and convictions. We don't, if the voters disagree, then they just don't vote them in. But they don't say once in office, put that on the shelf. What other sphere of life do we say, don't live your convictions?
I don't think anybody here on this platform is saying that. We all agree that you're going to bring your value system and your faith with you. I'm concerned that not everybody's being transparent. Some of our politicians are not being transparent about really what they're wanting.
Mm-hmm.
But and I think that's across the board. Yeah.
And that's probably true.
Religious and not religious.
And I agree that that's the beauty of having the ability to vote.
Yeah, that's right.
Right? So,
Amen.
like in my pulpit, when I had a pulpit, we wouldn't say who to vote for, but we'd say, go vote.
Yeah.
I think to answer the question of what other sphere of life would this happen, I would say many spheres of life. I, as a rabbi, am not going to express my political views from the pulpit because I don't think it's appropriate.
Right.
I've said many times, I don't want to give a sermon where half the congregation gets up and applauds and the other half gets up and walks out.
Yeah.
I'm here to help unite and to present ideas. So, I started this by saying, we knew what was coming. I don't mean to make a political statement, but, and then, we know what happens. But I think that we are confusing and blurring the line between saying a person is elected to the office of whatever, even president, and doesn't have any values anymore. That's not the case. My point, the first part of my statement was, he said, this is what I believe as a person and what I do in my personal life. My reason I liked the answer was because he's not imposing that on everyone else. It doesn't mean he's leaving his values at the door and doesn't care about people. But I think that's where the difference is. And I think this is why our founding fathers, I would argue, would have created a country where no one person comes in and says, I'm this religion, and therefore everybody's going to be this religion, right, which is what they were doing before.
So I'm going to have Stephanie. It looks like you want to jump in before I ask a question.
No, you're fine.
Okay.
You're fine.
All right. So I'm hearing on one hand that, it's difficult, if not impossible, or sometimes it does happen, where we can separate our personal beliefs from the decisions that we make, even in political office. I'm also hearing that there are tensions, right, that arise because everyone is bringing the fullness of themselves to the table. Yeah. So my question is this, because it was kind of brought up and I want to push a little bit there. How do we navigate the tension between religious teachings on the sanctity of life and the compassion required for individuals facing difficult choices regarding abortion?
You go first.
Nope.
I will. I'll say it's very simple for us as Catholics, I think. I mean, I don't think it's any secret here what the Catholic Church says about abortion. We believe that, life is sacred. We believe that once we have a conception of life, that's a human life, that has a value that's enormous, right? I mean, worth more than the universe, one could say. I mean, every human life, no matter where it's at, is very valuable and sacred, and it's made in the image of God. That's our belief, and so we think intentionally killing that. And again, there's some nuances. There are some exceptions here and there, but generally speaking, that life should be treated as sacred and such. And that's the first priority, is protecting life. That child has rights. That unborn child has rights, and it's just that simple. Mm-hmm. There's no confusion there, and I know some people don't agree, and that's okay, and they're free to. I don't think from my perspective as a priest, I don't think that this issue of abortion is going to be resolved with the government, right, and laws and so on. That's not my concern. I think it's something, as a Christian, I want to make that clear, because we were talking earlier about the president. And I, by the way, I'll criticize every politician. They say all kinds of silly things. But I don't think that this is an issue that's going to be resolved at the ballot box or maneuvering certain people into power or injustices and so on. You know, the word of God, Jesus didn't force himself on people. The word convinces. And so I think that's really the path, is to try to persuade and convince people of what I just said. That's my goal, is to persuade people that life is sacred and we need to treat it as such. And I think that's the real answer to the problem with abortion.
So it's interesting because you said that it's as simple as that. And I'm wondering if it really is that simple, because some would say that we raise the question of whose life is sacred. Are there lives that are more sacred than others? If we are talking about sanctity of life and those kinds of issues, what happens with mom? Is her life sacred in certain kinds of ways in childbearing? So on one level, it's as simple as that. And on another level, we know that typically nothing's simple. So what are your thoughts?
Again, going back to the idea of values, and I think this whole abortion issue, which is so central and so, you know, one of the hot points of debate in this country, I think we've done ourselves a disservice by labeling the two camps, to say, or mislabeling the two camps. To call one camp pro-life is not fair, because it implies the other side is not pro-life, as you're saying, and that's not true. The other side, I've spoken to many people on both sides of the issue. I think everyone is pro-life, but pro-life not in the way that it is called in the debate, but pro-life in terms of what you're talking about, Latricia, which is we all value life. But again, whose life? When? And now, speaking as a rabbi, Jewish law is different than Christian law when it comes to life. This really comes down to an issue of when does life begin? Life begins in Jewish law at birth, right? If the baby is born the standard way, it's when the head and shoulders are out. If the baby is breech, there's even laws about that. The majority of the body has to be out. And that's when life begins. Now, that's not to say that there is no form of life before, and we don't care about the fetus or in any development, or that we're pro-abortion, or that people who are pro-choice are pro-abortion. But these labels are making it really hard. If we stopped and just looked at what we have in common, what we are valuing, and had a discussion, we may not be happy with what the other person is saying, but we might understand. And if we did that, we would be in a better place. I agree with you that it shouldn't be the government, and it wouldn't be the government who determines that. And that's basically why I said what I said about liking what our president's saying about it. He's saying, I'm not going to let my view as the president or the government dictate.
Well, let me be clear. I do think it should be illegal, because I think those children should have rights. I think they're human beings. What I'm saying is I don't think that this whole problem is going to be solved through the ballot box and through laws.
I agree with that.
To me, the ideal world, and I think most people would agree, even those who tolerate abortion, or however you want to say it, I think most people agree that the world would be a better place if we never had one. And I think deep down in our hearts, we all know that's the case.
Can I jump in there if that's okay? Just to elaborate on what Rabbi was saying about Jewish law, that Jewish law does also accommodate to protect the life of the mother.
Yeah.
And so there is, as Rabbi said, a designation of life at that point while a woman is pregnant. However, let's flip back to the Constitution and separation, the wall, so to speak. If we are making laws about medical practices that are in direct relation to religious doctrine, that is not the separation.
That's right.
Personally,
That's
that I
right.
think the law accounts for. And I do believe, everybody has their own personal opinion. In a perfect world, would anybody be in that situation where they have to have a termination? Of course not. But the fact of the matter is that it does happen. And for many medical reasons, it's incredibly important for a woman to be able to have a D&C, God forbid, she reaches a point where she has a miscarriage.
Right.
I understand all those kind of cases that come up, and our Catholic theology has exceptions for some of those and ways of dealing with that. So I don't think that's the majority. The vast, overwhelming majority of abortions are definitely not that. So I think maybe we could agree that would be something worth trying to limit and regulate and so on. I mean, I know we bring up these cases where a mother's life is in danger. We have theology about that as well. That would be one of those nuanced kind of exceptions I was talking about. But I think, again, you said, I mean, I think it would be ideal. And I think that's the goal, is that we would never need this, right? And then therefore you wouldn't even need a law permitting it or prohibiting it if we were changed. And I think that's the real mission, not just voting and activism and who's on the courts this time and who's on the courts that time and who happens to be a power at this given moment. We really need to change as a people. And that's my job as a priest. I'm not a politician, so.
Right, but that's kind of my point, is that it shouldn't matter who is on the Supreme Court and who isn't. It shouldn't be, their religious perspective should not be taken into account. But I don't care either way. Sorry, go ahead, Josh.
Okay, so to take that and just to press it farther, we don't, so why, if I were to say that, then why would I'm being careful when I'm saying this, but so if an elected official happened to have a Jewish conviction, okay, a Jewish faith, and why do they care for the homeless? Why do they want to care for the single mom?
Sure.
I would assume part of that's going to come from their religious conviction about this person being created imago Dei, image of God, right? But I don't look at that and go, no. I don't want your religious conviction interfering with public health policy. Do you get what I'm saying?
I do get what you're saying.
But I think what we do is we take abortion, because it's so divisive and it's such a culture flashpoint, that I think sometimes we apply different categories to that, because I'm not aware of any mainstream religious conviction that says we should not care for, you know what I mean? And so therefore we find common ground, and then that's the water we're in. So we're like, what's water? We don't notice that we all agree, but that is all coming from a religious conviction. So that to me, it's dangerous to go, you're only advocating that because of your religious conviction, and therefore you shouldn't be able to advocate that because it's a religious conviction, when we don't do that with other policy issues.
I take what you're saying, but I would come back to that with all of these other categories as well. I mean, especially with regards to abortion, termination, however you want to refer to it as. If your perspective is that even if the law says you can have a termination of a pregnancy up to 6 weeks, and your religious perspective is that that is wrong in your theology, then your family and you make that choice, that is not for you. Now, granted, there are situations where people are in a situation where they need a termination, and they are perhaps they are feeling threatened by their family's theology. I mean, I don't think it really should be up to one denomination to choose for the entire country what is appropriate medically for an individual's body. I mean, if life is important, are vasectomies also covered under this? I mean, there's a lot of conversation we could have about it. But I see what you're saying, Josh.
Say about that.
Yeah.
So I want to have so many thoughts right now about that, Stephanie. Thank you. There are so many culture wars, right, that we fight that are really around things being rooted in our religious traditions, perspectives, that get fought in public political spaces because it's all of who we are. But I want to go back to the comment that, we won't solve this at the ballot box. And I want to say, yet, the ballot box does influence so many do's and don'ts and things that we're able to, and ways we're able to live. So while it may not find a solution, the ballot box seems to actually matter about a lot of things.
And
not just abortion. I'm just talking in general.
But since you brought up abortion, and since you brought up ballot box together, I'm old enough, along with some of the others in the room, to remember when the moral majority came forward and created the issue of abortion as a political issue. And it was at that point they were looking, you look at the research, Sister Jerry Falwell was very much a part of it. Some of the people I really respected at the time were a part of it. They were looking for an issue that would gather evangelicals around the ability to move them emotionally to the ballot box. So even though now if I talk to young evangelicals about their view on abortion, they may not know where that came from, but it was not the topic of discussion in congregations in the 70s. But late 70s, early 80s, it became something that has now become a flashpoint for our culture wars. So all that to say is that, was it really from religious conviction, a religious conviction that just kind of came on the scene in the 70s, early 80s? Yeah. So I just have to say that. Same with the state stuff. There is pressure to move people in a specific direction. And I believe religious politicians on either side are using religion as a way to divide us. And that's why this panel is so important, that we at least sit here and go, okay, we might not disagree, but at least we're seeing varying perspectives. Because it's true, when you unpack our values, we have similar values. Mm-hmm. And yes, in a perfect world, there would be no child raped by their stepfather and being required to carry a baby to life when they're 8, 9, and 10 years old. And this is sadly more common than you know. And I am sitting here on this panel as a person that used to be the director of the Phi Center, which is a pro-life pregnancy center. And I value the center so much, and I value the work they do. But it is because I worked there with so many young pregnant women, old pregnant women, that I shifted. And I remember last time, Tim, you and I were on a panel that was just about abortion. I said to Tim afterwards, I said, I am so grateful for the Catholic stand, because we need your voice. But I no longer believe that abortion should be outlawed. Because I've seen too many women that need the health care that is brought to them through their doctors with this kind of permission. So it scares me where we're headed. That's all.
I think this gets back to the crux of this issue, because you're saying people come to the ballot box and people bring their values to the ballot box. People bring their thoughts. That's what we hope for anyway. We hope people aren't voting with empty minds or hearts and just voting for whatever name they recognize or whoever was criticized the least or whatever it is. We hope that they're voting based on who they think will represent their values best. And that's everyone's right to do that. And we live in a country where if the majority of the people hold these values, then that gets voted in. But when it comes to abortion or things like that, we can't. This is, I think, the basic question here. The Constitution, and I think how it was formed, is not to allow one person to come in and say, this is my belief and I'm imposing it. So yes, we're not, I don't think we're saying, no, you can't, again, come in with any beliefs. Leave your beliefs at the door when you're president. Not at all. I wouldn't want a person like that who stands for nothing. But that doesn't mean they can dictate exactly what they think it should be to everybody, because it's a democracy. We're representing a whole huge spectrum of views.
So we're talking about the ballot box, ballot, and voting and views and government and all of the things. There are some who say there are many people who have traditionally felt like we need less government instead of more government to make decisions, quote, for us. And there are those who say that yet some of these same people seem to be using religion and religious ideology as a tool to enforce their culture or beliefs on other people. What might you say to that? That on one hand, we're saying, no, I don't want as much government control, I want less. And then I'm also saying, however, and I'm going to use this perspective, my religion, as somewhat of a tool to enforce my ideas on everyone in a diverse country.
Right. That's
what would you say?
There's kind of a lack of, from what I observe, consistency with these sort of things on both sides of the aisle. We have to be honest about the fact that there's simply a tension between freedom and the good. As I said before about laws, there are decisions about what's good and what's right and so on.
Right.
And laws are there to constrict us in some way and to kind of, so your freedom doesn't disappear with my freedom being, totally absolute. I could take away your freedom and so on. So there's laws to restrict that. That's kind of basic philosophy.
Or not.
Right?
Like now we have open carry.
Open
So
carry.
there's
Okay.
a law that doesn't restrict, right?
I think it's.
I don't know.
We don't have that
What
in this
is
state.
it?
Yeah, you don't need a concealed permit anymore. I
Right,
believe.
exactly.
Yeah. Like I know the laws of Florida, not
That's what
Louisiana.
I'm saying. But that's what I mean. Like,
yeah.
in some laws, I would want more restrictions in some areas,
Right.
And less.
Yeah, that's the thing. So you have on the one hand, the government. I'm trying to be as apolitical as possible. Let's say a particular
hard to.
person says, we want. Well, we'll use COVID as an example. That was a great, awesome time that we all miss, I'm sure. I was
The good
joking
old
about it
days.
in my parish.
That's what
Like,
we
I
call
miss
it.
all the people mad at me because why do we have to wear masks? And then other people mad at me because why wasn't everybody wearing a mask? It was a good time. We all loved that. But during that time, we'll just use our state as an example because that's where we live. The governor wanted schools to open. He didn't want kids wearing masks. People disagreed with that. And so on the one hand, local school boards were saying, no, we want to do our own thing. We want to rule on our own. And people were frustrated that the governor kind of enforced this as a statewide rule. Conservatives would have their arguments for why he did that and why he was allowed to do that and so on. But I think those same conservatives, if the shoe was on the other foot, if we had a different governor who was saying everybody has to wear masks or, having a different thing, and then the local school boards who were more conservative aligned or whatever. And it's so silly, right, that this was a political thing with this pandemic. But if it was the other way around, I'm sure they would be complaining too, like the governor's overreaching and so on. So I just don't see a lot of consistency. I think both parties, both perspectives seem to be okay with limiting freedom in these circumstances, but then at the same time talk about freedom. I think we need to be honest and realize, look, there's this tension between the good and freedom. And how do we resolve that is what we do in the political sphere, right? We debate that and discuss it. But trying to take a moral high ground as if I'm more for freedom than this other person. I'm sure we investigate every single person. You're going to find, well, here's where they're restricting freedom. Here's where this person isn't.
That's good.
So there is a quote from the same article that I began with and lifted up some things. It says that the Establishment Clause separates church from state, but not religion from politics or public life. People are free to bring their religious convictions into the public square precisely because the government must treat all faiths equally. So part of what I am hearing from you all in a conversation is that in many ways, because our religion, because our faith, because our values are intrinsically and deeply a part of our identity, it is difficult to have a true separation of church versus state, even though that's the dichotomy that we try to make. Are there any final thoughts, because we're closer to wrap up, that you might want to give, church versus state? What do you want the people to hear from you?
I think religious views should be brought into the discussion, but they should not be imposed singularly on the discussion. I think there should be a debate. There should be many views taken into account. And that's how we've grown as a country and how we thrive as a country, to be a democracy that's survived for almost 250 years because we have different views. And frankly, as much as it's frustrating to hear views that don't align with mine, I'm kind of glad we have them, because if we didn't, it would go way too far off the other way. We need a balance of all views, and then we somehow manage with all the craziness and chaos to come to the right place at the end and move forward as a country, sometimes not in a straight line, but with a lot of bumps along the way, but we move forward. But only through hearing many voices. Otherwise, we're basically robots or puppets, and we don't have any voice in our country.
Because we are still a democracy, not a theocracy. And that, to me, is critical. And I think that's what the Establishment Clause was about. We are not to establish a specific church or even view of God, theocracy. So
I mean,
keep talking.
I would just say we've alluded a little bit here to, even in our own congregations, not everybody agrees on everything. And our congregations are clearly an example of society. The Talmud, which is Jewish sacred text, is not a model for this is exactly how everything has to be. It's a model of here's how you can adapt and live and create society and change with the times. So from my perspective, that's the only religious document that I think might have some value here.
I think I want to make clear too, I think what's important with the Establishment Clause is the church should not, it should be outside. It'd be something that's outside of government. It should not take the place of the state. It should not be in the state. It shouldn't have any of the roles of the state. It should have a totally separate sphere. I also, at the same time, think that the state cannot find its own morals on its own, right? It needs something from the outside to inform it of what's right and wrong and so on. And I see the church as being a potential source for that. And so that's where I think our duty comes in as a leader and a faith leader, is to try to help, do my best to persuade or convince. And I may fail, and that's okay, whatever. But that's our job and that's our goal. And I think any kind of political power is dangerous.
Okay.
And yeah.
30 seconds, Josh.
Oh, no. I think, one thing that we didn't touch on as much, but was often in this conversation, we're so concerned about protecting state from the church, but we didn't talk about the whole point of it was to protect the church from the state.
Yes.
And so we've made the church religion the bad guy. And instead, the framers were concerned that government is the one who's going to overreach, not religious expression. So maybe we need to put our thumb on the scale on the other side and give a little more leniency to religious expression.
Sounds like that could be a great follow-up God Squad.
See how we agree
on that? We agree on that? Okay.
Yes.
And so I would like to say, just because we are in this political season, if you will, and having this church versus state conversation, what I'm hearing is it does matter. The ballot box matters. Go vote, y'all. And with that, I want to say thank you all so much for participating in the God Squad, for being here. Hopefully it gives us an idea of conversations that can come and the ways that we can make life better and help other people have these conversations as well. So that's it for our time today, everyone. Thank you again to the God Squad members. Thank you for those who are joining us, and to everyone online in the live studio for being here today. And on behalf of myself, the God Squad, WFSU, Village Square, we hope you have a phenomenal day. Go and be great.